Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, where we would try to comprehensively analyze 6 articles from the Hindu, along with the mains value addition and the daily practice questions. In the very first topic, we'll talk about the evolving importance of the geopolitical construct of the Indo-Pacific, the associated challenges, and the way forward. Then, in the second article, we'll talk about the emerging cracks in the overall development of artificial intelligence, primarily in the context of social inequalities. Then, in the prelims pointers, we'll have a discussion with respect to 5 different topics, along with the value addition from a special perspective of the upcoming UPSC prelims 2027 examination. So stay tuned. Coming to the very first topic of today's discussion, this is about the Indo-Pacific, rules versus rivalry. After the end of the Second World War, there has been a power shift. There has been a power transition from the larger Atlantic construct to that of the Indo-Pacific construct. And the biggest manifestation, or how this is reflected, is in the rise of 2 Asian giants, that is India and China. Now, what you'll observe is that, especially after 2001, what we have seen is the aggressive rise of China. And that has led to a lot of geopolitical chaos and conflict in this particular region, that is the Indo-Pacific. Let's talk about the Korean Peninsula crisis. Let's talk about the Taiwan Strait crisis. Let's talk about the South China Sea, or some other forms of challenges, including the piracy or the drug trafficking or the human trafficking. So therefore, this makes this particular region quite important. And it is for that reason that the Barack Obama administration came up with the pivot to Asia policy. Why? Because even for them, they realized that the future lies in Asia. Therefore, if you look at the overall geopolitical construct of the Indo-Pacific, what you'll observe is that India occupies a very unique position. It occupies a very strategic position in the Indo-Pacific. That is, it is central to this particular region, specifically with respect to the Indian Ocean. Therefore, this region becomes of utmost critical importance for India, right? And it is for that reason that we have had the very first visit of Japanese Prime Minister after assuming the office to India, and we have basically gone with a lot of defense deals. We have come up with the co-development and co-production, and we are also talking about a lot of critical agreements with respect to technology. And we have emphasized, India and Japan have emphasized that India and Japan are among the biggest economies of the world. A free, prosperous, and rules-based Indo-Pacific is our shared priority. Because you know that Japan do not share very good relations with China. There is subtle animosity between these two countries, and India has had not very good relations with China. In fact, our greatest strategic competition is with China. That is one of the biggest strategic threats which India has with respect to China. Therefore, this region becomes quite important, and we'll try to comprehensively cover what this particular region is all about, what is its importance, general importance, what is its importance with respect to India, what are the challenges involved, and what should be the way forward. Believe me, if a question comes with respect to Indo-Pacific, you'll be able to write a very good answer. Now, before I start the discussion, many of you have come to me and said, sir, would it be better if we just go through the handout if we don't refer the video? See, the analysis part, especially with respect to the very first 2 topics, it's not just a PPT it's not mere a PPT reading exercise. It's about explaining things, right? You'll have to understand that if you give importance to what is being told, you'll be able to do the value addition in a much better way. So try to utilize by first watching the video, because again, as I said, it's not just about bombarding the content in the PDF. It's about explaining what is really important from the perspective of the examination. Again, this is a part of GS2, International Relations. Now, if there were a question with respect to the Indo-Pacific, ideally you should mention the definition of the Indo-Pacific and how we would basically start with what is Indo-Pacific, a strategic and geopolitical construct from the eastern coast of Africa to that of the Western Pacific Ocean. So it's a very large geopolitical construct. That is what you'll have to understand. Integrating the 2 large oceans, Indian and the Pacific Oceans, into a single strategic theater. or what you can say is a single geopolitical theater. And it's in fact the most important geopolitical theater of the 21st century. Okay? So this is quite important from the perspective of trade, from the perspective of security, from that of the connectivity and global governance. That is what makes this particular region the most important one in the present times. Now, why is this particular region important? The very first is, let's talk about the strategic aspects. If you look at the geographical perspective, you will see that this region connects the two large oceans, Indian and Pacific, right? Second is the population. This region encompasses almost 65% of the global population. So you can understand, 65, almost 2/3 of the global population. Then almost 60% of the global GDP lies within this particular region. Then global maritime trade, again, almost 60%. And almost 80% of the global seaborne oil trade. Whatever oil traverses throughout the world, almost 80% of that traverses via the Indo-Pacific region. So therefore, this is the importance, the strategic importance of this particular region. What is its economic importance? If you look at some of the countries, previously we used to talk about the Asian tigers in terms of Hong Kong, Taiwan, in terms of Singapore, right? South Korea. So these were the Asian tigers who basically had a very good economic growth rate in the 1990s to 2010, right? And then we have the Asian cubs, for example, including the countries of Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, right? And also what we are witnessing is the emerging economies like India. And there is a lot of economic productivity which is there in these countries, in this particular region. Then it is also the manufacturing hub. If you talk about the electronics, for example, South Korea or Japan, if you talk about the active pharmaceutical ingredients, for example, you have China. If you talk about the garments manufacturing, you have Vietnam. If you talk about the other plastic manufacturing, you have again China. We have the countries like Thailand who are emerging as the new manufacturing hubs, including the countries like Bangladesh. If you look at Nike or any of the Adidas product, you will see that it's written made in Bangladesh. So they are emerging as one of the largest manufacturing hubs, right? Critical supply chains. Critical supply chains with respect to the critical minerals. We all know that almost 80% of the supplies with respect to the critical minerals, including the rare earths, is with respect to China. It has almost 85% of the global processing capacity with respect to the critical minerals, which form the very bedrock, which form the very foundation of the emerging technologies. Let's talk about the data centers, or let's talk about the computing hardware which you require for artificial intelligence or quantum computing. So for that, you need these critical minerals, and China is a dominant player with respect to that, right? Or let's talk about the semiconductors. If I'm talking about the supply chains with respect to semiconductors, we have, for example, countries like Taiwan. We have the corporation, Taiwan Semiconductors Manufacturing Corporation, TSMC, which forms one of the most dominant, or it has effectively a monopoly as far as the advanced chips are concerned. So therefore, this region is very, very important. Then the security importance. It has become the center of great power politics. See, in international relations, whenever we used to talk about the great power politics, it was primarily in the context of USA and erstwhile USSR. Now, whenever we talk about the great power politics, it is primarily between USA and that of China. Now, because of this, what is happening is, see, these two countries, China and US, they are one of the largest trading partners. There's no denial about that fact. In fact, we had the recent visit by President Trump to China, right? The summit. But what you'll have to understand is that there is a kind of an antagonism which is there. There is a kind of a strategic mistrust which is there. Use these words in your answers. There is a kind of a strategic competition which is between US and China. And that has led to a kind of a fragmented world order. Fragmented as in that if US wants to do something and if China is not agreeing, what US has done, especially under the tenure of President Trump, what it has done is it has basically imposed a lot of tariffs, and that has in a way destabilized the whole scenario, the whole economic scenario. So it is leading to more of fragmentation in the world politics, right? There is technological fragmentation, because right now what we are witnessing is that there is technological race between US and China. We have companies who are basically investing millions and billions of dollars with respect to artificial intelligence, cloud computing, the space exploration. So there is a kind of a strategic rivalry between these two countries, and there are major flashpoints. Even though we generally don't include West Asia as a common or as an integral part of the Indo-Pacific, but as an extended arm, what you can say is that we have had the recent US-Israel on one hand and Iran on the other, the geopolitical flashpoint in the Persian Gulf. Then we have had issues with respect to the Korean Peninsula. Then we have had issues with respect to the Taiwan Strait. We have seen that there have been consistent issues with respect to the South China Sea, where China claims a large portion of the territories. So there have been global flashpoints with respect to this particular region. This is what you'll have to understand. Why is Indo-Pacific central for India? Here we discuss about the global importance, why it is central to India. The very first is, if you look at the overall trade aspect with respect to India, almost 95% of the trade by volume and almost 70% of trade by value, it traverses via the oceans. And therefore, this makes, first of all, Indian Ocean of critical importance for India, and including the larger Indo-Pacific construct. Okay. Next is India's crude oil imports. We are importing almost 89% of the crude oil needs, almost 50% of the LNG supplies, right? 89%, 85 to 89% of the crude oil needs, and almost 50% of the LNG supplies. And therefore, any of the disruptions, abhi kya hua tha? What happened? That in this particular region of Persian Gulf, we had the naval blockade, which was imposed first by IRGC, Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, and then again by US. So it led to the stoppage, a complete stop of these sea vessels carrying the crude oil. And as a result, what we have observed, India was not party to the war, but we have seen that the war has reached to our kitchens in a way that the prices of the gases, the prices of the crude oil, the gasoline, the petrol, the diesel, it has significantly increased, and therefore it is also it is having an effect on the overall economy, right? And the lowest strata of the society, it is ultimately bearing the most of the brunt. Okay? Strait of Hormuz, and because of it, what has happened is that we are bearing the brunt of it. Though we were not a party to the war, but still we are bearing the brunt. Next, let's talk about the energy security. As I said, crude oil and LNG. Almost more than 85% of the crude oil needs, and almost 50% they traverse via the ocean routes, right? And almost 50% of India's crude oil needs, they travel via the Strait of Hormuz. Now, you just imagine, if anything happens in this particular Strait of Hormuz, obviously it would affect almost 50% of oil supplies to India. That is something which is we need to worry about, right? Next is vital choke points. Now, if you look at this particular map, you'll see that there are certain vital choke points. First is the Strait of Hormuz, which is between the country of Iran and that of Oman. Okay. Second, we have Strait of Bab el-Mandeb, which is between the country of Yemen and that of Eritrea and Djibouti. There are two countries on this end in the African part. And then on the other part, we have Yemen, right? Then we have the Strait of Malacca, which is between Indonesia and Malaysia. And on the southern end, we have Singapore. Please make sure that you remember these countries, because there can be a probable question with respect to the straits, that which all country, between which country lie a particular strait. Okay? So these are of critical importance. These are the vital choke points with respect to the trade. And any disruption at these locations can have a disastrous impact on the global economy. Okay? And economic disruptions. What we have seen, that this is leading to, what ultimately is happening, that this is increasing our current account deficit, because the prices of the crude oil has increased. The insurance costs have risen up, and therefore ultimately we are bearing the brunt of that. Fiscal deficit is increasing. Exchange rate volatility. We already know what is the condition of Indian rupee with respect to US dollar. So this is what you'll have to understand. The war is impacting not just this particular war, any disruption in this particular region has a massive effect, as far as the disruption is concerned with respect to India. Okay. Next is with respect to the blue economy. We have basically gone with this aspect of blue economy. We want to adapt, or we want to go with a notion of blue economy. What it means is the sustainable use of ocean resources in a way which maximizes the productivity. Okay? If we talk about the exclusive economic zone, India has almost 2.37 million square kilometers of exclusive economic zone. Now, exclusive economic zone ka matlab kya hai? What does it mean? That this gives India the access to this large area where India can basically utilize the potential, utilize the mineral resources, can basically go for the exploitation, sustainable exploitation of these resources, for example, minerals, the seabed minerals, okay? And therefore, or fisheries, for example, and therefore this gives India a lot of opportunity. We can capitalize upon that, okay? But sustainably, okay? Next, we have coastline. India has almost 7,518 kilometers of coastline. Such a vast coastline India has, okay? And then we have more than 1,382 islands, which come under the overall India's sovereignty. So can you imagine, these are the important data points. 2.37 million square kilometer of exclusive economic zone, 7,518 kilometers of coastline, the eastern and the western coast. And then we have more than 1,382 islands. So therefore, again, this gives India a very important position in the overall region. Then it has a lot of potential in terms of sustainable usage of the fisheries, sustainable extraction of the fisheries, or offshore wind. Offshore wind, for example, we have different countries. We have Denmark. We have, for example, some of the countries, France, which has gone with basically this offshore wind, capitalizing upon the winds which blow over the oceans and then installing the wind farms over there, right? Then we have minerals, specifically the seabed minerals. The seabed minerals. In terms of the manganese nodules. Now these have a lot of cobalt, nickel, iron, manganese content, which is again very important for the emerging technologies in terms of the electronics. Okay? Next, we have biotechnology. We have some of the extraction. People are actually working with respect to some of the fishes or some of the seaweeds in the oceans, how we can extract. Some of them have anti-cancer properties. So biotechnology is very important. Then we have tourism. Tourism in the form of the ecotourism. We have many of these places such as in Andamans and Nicobars. We have in Lakshadweep, which are becoming the major tourist hotspot. But again, what Prime Minister said, that we need to basically make these regions as, for example, Lakshadweep or Andamans as a major tourism hotspots, making sure that we basically go with the sustainable tourism aspect. Okay? Next, we have the Mahasagar vision. Now, see, initially we came up with Sagar doctrine, security and growth for all in the region. Next, what Prime Minister has said is he has basically expanded, as he does always, he has expanded the vision into Mahasagar, that is mutual and holistic security and growth for all in the region. Now, this has more of an expansive domain where more of the interests of the other countries are also incorporated. For example, the security in terms of the anti-piracy operations, or HADR, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, because there are a lot of events which take place. For example, the natural events in the form of cyclones and or erratic rainfalls or torrential rainfalls, and therefore during these times we really need India as a first responder. Okay? Then we have capacity building of the small island developing states, SIDS. Again, I'm saying these are the keywords. Please make sure that you remember them and incorporate in your answer. Okay? Small island developing states in terms of Seychelles, or Pacific Islands, we'll talk about that. Connectivity, making sure that the passage is safe. If you are having a lot of seafarers, if you are having a lot of sea vessels which are passing through this particular region, almost having 90% of the overall volume, then you need to also make sure that the connectivity, the sea lines of communication, SLOC, are protected. Sea lines of communications are protected. Now, therefore, you'll have to go with a robust naval capacity. Okay? Act East policy. Initially, we came up with a look east. Then we said that we need to basically just not have the ideas. Rather, let's also focus on the action. Come up with more active partnerships from these East Asian countries. Therefore, the Indo-Pacific is central to the ASEAN. We have the ASEAN. And India has always said, and please make sure that you write in your answers, for India, ASEAN is central. ASEAN is central to the overall construct of Indo-Pacific. Okay. Let's talk about Bay of Bengal, multi-sectoral technological and economic cooperation, BIMSTEC. Or let's talk about Indian Ocean Rim Association. We have come up with these partnerships, which again make sure that Indo-Pacific is central to this particular ideas, to these particular ideas, or countering the China's expansion. China has come up, many of the defense policy experts, they have said that China is basically coming up with a policy known as the string of pearls, through which it is basically using its money, and it is making sure that it occupies the strategic islands, strategic ports. For example, Hambantota in Sri Lanka, or for example, Gwadar in Pakistan, or for example, Djibouti, okay? Or for example, Chittagong in Bangladesh. So these are the ports where in one form or the other, either there is a military capacity or a surveillance capacity, or there is a commercial installation which is there. Therefore, this is a kind of a strategic threat for India, okay? Or you talk about the Belt and Road Initiative. For example, we have CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. More than $60 billion have been invested in the CPEC. See, Pakistan is a country which can beg for, or which can beg to any of the other countries in the world, right? But again, what you'll have to understand is China is pouring in money. It's filling the pockets of these Pakistanis. And ultimately, what you'll have to understand is that this is again a strategic concern for India. Or you talk about China-Myanmar Economic Corridor. Okay. Then we have South China Sea. In South China Sea, what we are witnessing, that there has been an aggressive rise of China. There is active militarization which is being observed in China, in South China Sea. Okay. Debt diplomacy, this we all know. That China has big pockets. See, this is one of the important areas which you'll have to understand. India has a very goodwill in the minds of different countries of Africa or Latin America, or in even these small island developing states. But the point is that India does not offer that much of the money which China can. And ultimately, it is the money which people want. Okay? These small countries specifically, they won't consider the goodwill aspect. Okay? And ultimately, what happens is that once China makes these countries dependent on it, it then extracts the favors. It then makes, through various means, that it would say, okay, you're not able to give back the debt, let's basically install, or let's give me this particular island or this particular facility. And then it uses that particular facility from that perspective of the military architecture or the commercial exploitation. Okay? Now, what is India's vision for the Indo-Pacific? This was very clearly outlined in the India Indo-Pacific Ocean Initiative in 2019 by the Prime Minister. Now, this is something which you'll have to understand. And this is the string of pearls, yes. So we have, for example, here Chittagong port facility in Bangladesh. Then we have the Gwadar over here. So we have Hambantota over here. This is how it is creating. It is creating a kind of a string of pearls around India. Now tell me the strategy, a counter strategy which many of the defense analysts say, which India has adapted, okay, with respect to the string of pearls. Now if you look at the Indo-Pacific Ocean Initiative, you will see that there are 7 pillars. The very first pillar is marine ecology, and the lead is by Australia. Then we have science and technology and academic cooperation, the lead is Singapore. Then we have disaster risk reduction and management. We have capacity building and resource sharing. We have trade, connectivity and maritime transport. We have maritime resources. We have maritime security. So this is basically the Indo-Pacific Ocean Initiative, and these are the 7 pillars where we have said that the core principles, these are the pillars and these are the core principles. The core principles are free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific. We want a free, open and inclusive and rules-based Indo-Pacific. And it should be ASEAN-centric. The ASEAN countries must be central to the overall architecture of the Indo-Pacific, rules-based and UN clause compliant. United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, where what you'll have to observe is this forms the very bedrock of how the rules enforced in the ocean domain. So UN clause forms one of the very bedrock, and therefore we always abide by this particular aspect. Now, what is the current status? As we have seen that we have gone with a kind of an enhanced strategic partnership with Japan, and what we have gone with is the defense technology co-development in terms of the naval radio antennas. We'll co-develop the naval radio antennas. We've gone for the maritime domain awareness. Hota kya hai? What does it mean? Maritime domain awareness, that you are keeping an active watch on whatever is happening in the ocean domain, so that you can ensure the security, you can ensure the stability of these vessels which basically pass, and of the countries, specifically the small countries. That is maritime domain awareness. Joint naval exercises, for example, we have Dharma Guardian, we have JIMEX. Dharma Guardian is basically an army exercise. We have JIMEX. Okay, Japan India maritime exercise, naval exercise. Then we have semiconductors. We are basically looking for greater partnerships as far as semiconductors is concerned, as far as artificial intelligence is concerned. See, please understand, Japan is basically a country which is having a top-notch capability with respect to robotics, with respect to artificial intelligence, with respect to the lenses. You have these major companies, Canon and all these companies, they're based in Japan. Therefore, if we go for a technological partnership, we don't have that much of capital. India does not have that much of capital, but we have minds. We have good minds. So therefore, there can be a kind of an integrative partnership. Okay? Then we have strategic oil stockpiling. India can learn from Japan. Japan has strategic oil reserves to the tune of almost 210 to 240 days. That is, even if the oil supplies to Japan are cut off, now it can sustain itself for the next 210 to 240 days. That is what the capacity of Japan. But we have very less capacity. Though we have strategic petroleum reserves, SPRs, for example, in Padur, in Karnataka, but still it's not that up to the mark. Okay? So we can learn from Japan. These are the important points. Then we have Quad becoming stronger. We are emphasizing upon the Quad, but see, understand, here is the minute detail. For a country like US, Quad should have an aggressive posture. It wants Quad to act as an anti-China alliance system kind of thing. But we as Indians, we have never thought of Quad in that way. We always say that Quad is basically ensuring the Indo-Pacific security. देखो बहुत important difference है between the word security and defense. You have a person standing outside your residence. He is a security guard. He's not a defense personnel. Okay? You have defense personnel at the borders. So when you have an aggressive policy, that is basically the defense aspect. When you are just looking at the security aspect, your own security, you're not having an aggressive stance. That is basically the security aspect. So India looks at Quad as a security architecture. But what US wants is to have this as a kind of an alliance, a defense alliance. Okay? In the similar way what it has, for example, the NATO. Okay, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Quad is becoming stronger, and we have been emphasizing on the greater partnerships in critical technology. For example, with US, we have ICIT, initiative on critical and emerging technologies. Okay? We have these partnerships with different countries in the form of, we have technological partnership with South Korea, for instance. We have technological partnerships with Australia. We have come up with SEPA with Australia. So this is what is important. Or supply chains. We are looking for diversification of supply chains, or HADR, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, in case any mishappening occurs, for example, in form of any of the cyclones or any of the natural activity, then we act as the first responder. Or Indo-Pacific economic framework. Look at this. So Indo-Pacific economic framework, it is not a trade pact, first of all. It was basically launched as a counter to RCEP. But RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, it is a China-dominated trade pact. India is not a part of it. Though we participated in the negotiations, but we did not basically become a part of it. IPEF is not a trade agreement. It has some of the important pillars. For example, trade as pillar 1. We have supply chains as pillar 2. We have clean economy as pillar 3rd. We have fair economy as pillar 4. India has joined pillars 2nd to 4th, while India, it has an observer status in pillar 1, because it does not want to follow the guidelines of US as far as trade is concerned, because we have some form of a kind of a restrictive trade policy, because we want to save our domestic producers, and for example, we have the farmers or the manufacturers. Okay? Then India and France are having a robust cooperation with respect to the Indo-Pacific construct. For example, the Reunion Island cooperation, or for example, the maritime surveillance. Okay. Then we have India, ASEAN. We are strategic partners. Initially, we were dialogue partners. Then we converted ourselves into strategic partnership, and we have very good booming trade. Even though we have gone with the free trade agreement with ASEAN, but what we are observing is that it is not that beneficial to India as much as it is beneficial to ASEAN countries. So we are also looking for a revision of the free trade agreement. So these are the important things which India is doing with the key partners in the Indo-Pacific. What are the major challenges? The very first is China's assertiveness. Specifically, if you will observe, after 2001, when China joined the World Trade Organization. And this was basically on American insistence. America insisted that China should join the World Trade Organization. And later, it became a kind of a Frankenstein monster for America, because America initially thought that once China would be integrated in the World Trade Organization, it would follow the rules-based order. It would make sure that its economy is on that line. But it grew aggressively. The economic aspect of China grew aggressively, and it has in a way posed challenge to the US. And therefore, this is a kind of a strategic threat for the US. And not just the US, but also the other countries. If you look at the military expansion of China, especially in the form of the 9-9, so you have South China Sea. In South China Sea, China claims that there is a 9-line area, and it says that whatever area comes within it, it is all under the sovereignty of China. And we have the other countries. For example, we have Philippines, we have Japan, we have Vietnam over here, we have Malaysia and Indonesia. So they have their own claims. They say that it is basically our area. It is our exclusive economic zone, not that of Chinese. So there are tensions in this particular region. Militarization of the islands is taking place. There is the reclamation of the islands. Artificial islands are being constructed, which are then being used as military facilities. Okay? Gray zone warfare. What is gray zone warfare? See, there are two things. One is the peacetime. No, nothing is happening, countries are having good relations. Then you have complete war. Gray zone warfare is somewhere in between. That there is no active fight, but there are proxy wars in the form of cyber warfare. Okay? Or in the form of, let's say, there can be psychological warfare. China is expert in that. China is expert in psychological warfare. Okay? They follow a lone wolf diplomacy, okay? Wolf warrior diplomacy kind of thing. So this is what you'll have to understand. Impact kya hota hai? What is the impact with respect to this? See, if countries like China, they don't observe the rules-based order, what is the utility of these particular conventions? For example, the United Nations Convention of the Law of Sea. If they're not observing, for example, I'll tell you, in 2016, Permanent Court of Arbitration, it gave an award in favor of Philippines. That Philippines ideally is the one which should have sovereignty over these particular islands. But China outrightly rejected this particular award. So this is again an important concern. And this affects the stability. Stability, specifically the regional stability. Okay? Maritime security threats, for example, in terms of what we are observing, and we'll read today, what we are observing is that there has been a resurgence of piracy in this particular region. Why? Because most of the countries, specifically in the Persian Gulf, in the Gulf of Aden, and then you have these countries like Somalia. Over there, what is actually happening is countries are now they're involved in wars. For example, the Iran conflict. So they're not able to focus on these important issues. And this is giving the opportunity to these pirates. And the piracy has increased in this particular. There has been resurgence of the piracy. Or terrorism. Terrorism is also there. We have many of the groups, specifically in Africa. They are using the sea routes. Okay? That is again a concern. Or drug trafficking or the human trafficking. Okay? Impact, it threatens the very sea lines of communication, which forms the very bedrock of the international trade. If something happens to the sea lines of communication, obviously the trade would be affected. Supply chain vulnerability. Let's talk about what happened during the COVID times. There was a complete halt. Supply chains were disrupted. And then the countries realized that there was a kind of an over-dependency, which we had on countries, for example, like China. Almost all the countries of the world, they were dependent on Chinese manufacturing supply chains. And then they talked about economic decoupling, that we need to decouple from the dependence which we have on China. And therefore, there were strategies like China +1, where different multinational corporations said that we need to basically diversify the manufacturing to other countries. For example, Vietnam, Thailand, Bangladesh, including India. Okay? Or the Russia-Ukraine crisis. What happened? See, we are one of the major importers of Russian oil. Or we are one of the major importers of oil seeds. Sunflower oil, for example, from Ukraine. Or corn. Or we have the boilers, steam boilers, which were imported from Ukraine. But again, that gave a complete halt. Okay? Or let's talk about West Asian crisis. The oil supplies have been completely disrupted. So this impacts the energy, this impacts the fertilizers. We have been importing a lot of the base material, a lot of base material for the fertilizers, which forms a very base material of the fertilizers precursors, what we call as, from Russia. And therefore, these reduced supplies have, in a way, made sure, including the West Asian crisis, because we are not able to import much of the LNG supplies. And this is quite a concern for India because the agricultural production would be impacted. Abhi kya ho raha hai? There are multiple factors. What is happening now is that there are multiple factors. First of all, we have El Nino conditions, less of rainfall deficit. Second, fertilizer. Why that is being affected? Because we are not importing much of LNG. We don't have much of LNG for the production of urea, and that impacts the agricultural production. So it has an overall impact. ठीक है? Or with respect to semiconductors, semiconductor supply chains were completely halted, and semiconductor is something which is basically omnipresent, which is there in everything. The laptop or the mobile phone through which you are watching me, or the camera through which this is being recorded, everything contains that semiconductor. And once anything happens, let's say there is a geopolitical conflict which happens in Taiwan, that would have an effect on the semiconductor supply chains. These are the examples. Why I'm elaborating on these examples is so that you can understand, you can imagine, and then you can have good points while you're writing the answers. Okay? See, in the examination, what really matters is howsoever you have studied. What really matters is how many crisp and to the points value additions you have over there itself. So therefore, the more you will think, the more number of points you can generate. Rules-based order under stress. For example, in South China Sea, I've already told you, the Permanent Court of Arbitration gave the order in favor of Philippines, but it was not accepted by China. Or let's talk about Taiwan Strait. Taiwan has a persistent existential threat with respect to China, that anytime China can basically attack Taiwan. And China has again, once President Trump visited China has very clearly said that there should not be any American intervention. Otherwise, it would be seen as an outright war. Okay? Or climate change. We are witnessing the anthropogenic climate change. मतलब क्या होता है? Human induced climate change. देखो, एक तो climate change होता है natural. One is the climate change which is natural, which happens. The ice age and then transition again the ice age. Then you have anthropogenic climate change because of the humans, specifically after the industrial revolution. What we have seen is the average rise in the greenhouse gas emissions, and that has led to the average rise in the temperature. What it is leading to is the melting of the polar ice. If the ice on the poles would melt, what would happen? It would raise the sea level, and ultimately who will be most affected? Which all countries? The small island developing states, SIDS. For example, you have countries, SIDS. You have countries like Tuvalu, or you have Vanuatu. You have Cook Islands, or you have Micronesian Islands. Use these in your examples. So they are subjected to the most gravest of the effects of the climate change because of the sea level rise. Okay? Next, we have marine pollution. The unprecedented use of plastics. It is creating a havoc. It is ultimately going into the oceans. It is being ingested by the aquatic animals, specifically the fishes, and then it is leading to the bioaccumulation and biomagnification, ultimately going in the human bodies. Carcinogenic plastic. So these are the climate-related issues. Then we have illegal fishing, known as illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing. Again, fishing should be carried out in a regulated manner. There cannot be, for example, you have bottom trawling. पढ़ा होगा आपने. Bottom trawling is a practice where they use the nets and then they basically drag it on the seabed. And ultimately what happens is those pristine or the pure marine environment, that gets destabilized. That should not be allowed. So we have this illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing. And this, according to the FAO estimates, it runs to almost $23 billion. $23 billion annually, according to the FAO estimates. ठीक है, तो ये सब चीजें हैं. Then what are the India's strategic advantage? अब ये सब challenges हमने देखे, but strategic advantages क्या हैं इंडिया के पास? The very first is its unique position, its central position in the Indian Ocean. See, no other country occupies that position which India occupies. The peninsular projection of India in the Indian Ocean gives it a very strategic location, a vital location. ठीक है. Then we have the Andaman and Nicobars. Now, Andaman and Nicobars, what you'll have to understand is that they act as military outposts, strategic military outposts. कहीं भी mention करना हो, whenever you want to mention the Andaman and Nicobar, use these words: strategic military outposts for India. For example, for coastal surveillance, Okay, so it would make sure that India has an eye of what is happening in this particular region. Or let's talk about the Indian Navy. We are with time making sure that we make our Indian Navy architecture very robust in the form of the increasing numbers of warships or the nuclear submarines. Okay, so these are the important things. Or we have the Information Fusion Center in the Indian Ocean region in Gurgaon, which basically collects all the data from various sources and then it processes the data and gives it to the friendly countries, for example, France. Okay. Then we have humanitarian assistance as first responder. We had Operation Dost for country, Turkey, when it suffered from the earthquake, the Turkey earthquake. Or we had Operation Rahat in Yemen. Okay. Or we had Vaccine Maitri. These are the examples. Okay. Next, what are the strategic opportunities for India? The blue economy. So we can basically go for the untapped resources, mineral resources by sustainable fishing, or in terms of the seabed resources, manganese nodules. We can go for tourism, sustainable tourism. Okay. Semiconductors partnerships with different countries, including Taiwan, with South Korea, with Japan, including with US, okay, or Australia, technological partnerships. Supply chain diversification, for example, we have gone with supply chain resilience initiative, including Australia, Japan. Okay, very important supply chain resilience initiative. Defense manufacturing. We have, we already have good partnerships with Russia, for example, as far as the joint production is concerned. Now we are also going with a country like Japan. We have told that we would manufacture the naval radio antennas, co-production, co-development, or maritime connectivity. We need to make sure that the sea lines of communications are safe so that there is a kind of an impetus which is given on the development of the maritime connectivity. These are the opportunities which India has. What should be the way forward? The very first is strengthen the maritime security. Maritime security is in terms of the naval capability. Though we are investing significantly as far as the overall naval construct is concerned, but we need to be more competitive. For example, what China is doing in terms of the warships, in terms of the nuclear submarines. Okay, because we have a lot of area in the Indian Ocean, and please understand that we are basically saying that we are the net security provider. So if we are saying we are the net security provider, we'll have to make sure that we have adequate capability in place. Then we have maritime domain awareness so that we can share the data, the maritime data with the friendly countries. Okay. Then we have promote the rules-based order in terms of promoting or making sure that the convention is being properly followed by different countries. The United Nations Convention of the Law of Sea, which deals with the territorial aspect, the exclusive economic zone. Okay. Then we have freedom of navigation. We need to constantly emphasize in our dealings with the other countries that freedom of navigation is important. For example, what happened? Iran unilaterally or US unilaterally imposed the naval blockade. So therefore, that is not in line with the UN clause. And they both are not the partners. They're not basically the ratifying partners of UN clause. Diversify the energy sources. For example, we already have the strategic petroleum reserves, but we need to come up with more of these reserves so that we can increase it to almost 90 days capacity. At least we need to have a 3 months capacity. For that, we'll have to significantly invest in the strategic petroleum reserves, which are the large caverns which we have, the large caves in which the petroleum is stored. Then we have sources, for example, diversification. We'll have to diversify. We cannot be dependent on one particular geographical region for our needs, for our oil needs, specifically the energy needs. We'll have to diversify it. Then we have green hydrogen. We need to go for, and this is something which we'll have to do anyways. We'll have to go for the green sources. So we need to significantly invest. We have come up with the National Green Hydrogen Mission. So we need to give impetus to that, to come up with more of these alternative energy sources. Build strategic partnership with like-minded countries in terms of France, in terms of Japan, Australia. Strengthen the island diplomacy, enhance cooperation with these countries. For example, Solomon Island, or for example, Tuvalu, or these small countries of Vanuatu, Fiji, for example. We have the Forum for these Pacific Island States, FIPIC, what we call as FIPIC, Forum for these Pacific Island States. So we need to have more of collaboration with this. Resilient supply chains in terms of semiconductors, more robust supply chains, or let's talk about the logistics in terms of the overall packaging, transporting, insurance, carriage. We need to focus on these aspects, the overall logistics. Defense indigenization. For example, we need to come up with more of co-development and co-production. So this should be basically emphasized. Or climate cooperation, we have already done that through International Solar Alliance or Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, CDRI and ISA. Or what we can do is, we have the technology in place, we can install the early warning system in these small island developing states. We can help them with the finances. At least whatever we can help with the finances, with these lines of credit. So what you'll have to understand is, see, Indo-Pacific is no doubt, it is central to the geopolitical theater, and it is the most important entity what we have, and most of the events are taking place over here itself. So India having a unique position in this particular geopolitical construct, it needs to make sure that we follow the rules-based order. We make sure that we tell it to other countries that they should not basically have an aggressive posture, rather they should abide by the international rules and framework, and then only we can achieve a kind of a more sustainable growth, and for that we need peace. So therefore this is very important, the region is very important, and therefore we'll have to make sure that there is sustainable growth, there is the follow-up, or there is people follow the rules-based international order, freedom of navigation. It has to be inclusive, it has to be free, it has to be based on particular rules. That is what we are emphasizing. Let's have a mains practice question. The Indo-Pacific has emerged as a geopolitical center of gravity in the 21st century. In this context, discuss its strategic significance for India, examine the major challenges confronting India's Indo-Pacific vision, and suggest measures to strengthen its role as a net security provider in the region. Again, quite a comprehensive article which we have discussed. What all things we have discussed, please try to write it, and definitely it would be of immense help. And yes, if you're liking the initiative, do not forget to press the like button, and also let us know in the comment. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is about the cracks in the AI revolution. What we are witnessing right now is unprecedented, massive, rapid development of artificial intelligence, which has never been experienced before. But according to a UN report, this particular development is giving disproportionate advantage to developed countries, and therefore it is widening the inequalities between the developed and the developing countries. So therefore, what we'll have to make sure is to make it more equitable. Otherwise, it can have serious ramifications, serious consequences. AI holds scientific promise, but it should not unfold unchecked. Important part of GS3 science and technology. The context is the United Nations preliminary report of the Independent International Scientific Panel on the artificial intelligence. The concerns are, the number one, unequal distribution of AI benefits. Most of the development with respect to AI technology is taking place in certain countries, in US, in UK, in European countries, or in China. And they are basically getting the maximum benefit of it. They are utilizing or exploiting or optimizing AI in the maximum advantageous way possible. And because of this, what is happening is the developing countries are not able to tap the potential of AI, because ultimately the AI development is dominated by these countries. Concentration of power among a few technological firms. You can literally count the number of companies who are basically having a good name as far as AI is concerned. For example, we have Meta, we have Anthropic, we have ChatGPT, OpenAI, for example, we have Microsoft, we have Google. So these are the most dominant players, and they have large capital with them. The market capitalization or the total valuation of some of these companies is more than many countries combined. So this is what you'll have to understand. Governance challenge. Why? Because right now there is no governance framework as such. The developments which are taking place with respect to AI, they are basically not hindered. They do not have a boundary. They are basically going on a massive exponential scale. And therefore, this poses a quite serious challenge. Major fault line in the global AI ecosystem, global north-south divide. Advanced AI development is concentrated in a few countries. For example, in the US, in UK, in China, in some European countries, for example, in Germany or in France. Other than that, India is also doing that, but it's not doing as much as what is being witnessed in the US or in China. What are the concerns? AI benefits disproportionately to advanced economies. Developing countries are technologically dependent. That is what you'll have to understand. We are just acting as consumers. We have a very big market for these companies. Understand. There are millions of people in India who on a daily basis use these AI platforms and come up with the content, specifically in an industry like UPSC, So what you'll have to understand is that this is leading to just a dependence on these platforms. We are not coming up with our own models. For example, incorporating the vernacular languages or incorporating the needs or the setup, the needs of India, for example, the social challenges which we have. Okay? Limited influence, AI governance framework. We still do not have adequate voice as far as the overall development of AI is concerned. The governance aspect. Concentration of AI power, handful of companies control the large language models or the models development. See, we have these large language models which form the very base of the artificial intelligence. And the development of these LLMs is basically being done in these countries of US, China, or the other countries. We are not witnessing that kind of progress as which is being witnessed in these countries. Or computing infrastructure in the form of data centers, in the form of big these cloud computing infrastructure, supply chains, semiconductor supply chains. We are not regulating the semiconductor supply chains. Rather, these countries are regulating the supply of these advanced chips known as the graphic processing units, GPUs, which forms the very base. For example, a company like NVIDIA, it has a base H200 chip. So this is one of the GPUs. So this is what you'll have to understand. We are not deciding, rather these multinational corporations and these few countries are deciding. What is the implication? Few companies, they are deciding the public outcomes, democratic accountability with respect to these companies. Are these companies accountable to what is happening in India? See, there are deep fakes. There are deep fakes which are being created. The fake images which are being created and circulated on social media. That also leads to a kind of the derogatory, kind of comments for the women, because many of these morphed images are being circulated. So that is what you'll have to understand. Structural requirement for AI leadership. What you actually need. According to the report, countries that matter in the AI typically possess what they actually have: massive computing capacity, specifically in terms of the infra. For example, in terms of the data centers, in the terms of graphic processing units, abundant electricity, because electricity forms the core. The machines, these data centers, they require huge electricity. So they have consistent supply of electricity. For example, in the US, President Trump also said that we are going to utilize as much as fossil fuel necessary for the development of AI. Then capital availability, the money aspect, because again, it requires a lot of capital investments. Skilled human capital. And for that, we have countries like India who are ready to supply the good minds. And people are ready because they do not see a bright future in India. They do not see that kind of pay incentive which is available in the other countries, for example, in the US. So they're ready to go, right? What are the governance challenges for developing countries? The regulatory mismatch. The development of these technologies and these standards. देखो हर technology का एक standard होता है. For example, let's talk about telecommunications. We had first 4G, 5G, now we're thinking for 6G. So these technological standards we are not playing an active role in the development of these technologies and the standards. For that, we'll have to significantly invest in the technological capacity, in the indigenization of technology. Okay? Developed countries, and this creates the dependence on the developed countries, which in the other words can be known as digital colonialism. Use this word in your answers, digital colonialism, because we are one of the biggest markets for these. We already know. We have some of these, the Instagram, we have WhatsApp, we have all these companies which see India as a very big market. For example, ChatGPT, OpenAI is ChatGPT or Gemini. So therefore, we are not coming up with our own products. Rather, we are dependent on the other countries. Okay? Digital colonialism. Emerging risks from the AI deepfake epidemic. We are witnessing a massive proliferation of these morphed images, which primarily are used in the elections, which basically can turn the result of the elections in a day. Okay. Then we have harm to the news media. See, we have news reporters who basically work hard, come up with the content, create the content. And these platforms, these artificial intelligence platforms, they are using the journalistic content without paying them in return, without giving back the revenue. So again, it is hurting the journalistic aspect. Okay. The journalistic content without adequate compensation, psychological or social harms. People are basically searching on ChatGPT how to basically manage my relations with a girlfriend or how to manage my relations with the parents. Tell me 5 ways. I myself saw in the metro, a person was, he was talking to his father and he had an argument. And by chance, I just, had a watch over what he was searching, and he was just searching, just standing. You already know the crowd situation in metro. He was searching how to give me 5 ways to pacify my father. So this is the condition to which people have gone, right? Emotional dependency, cyber security risk, automate cyber attacks. So these platforms now have the capacity to automate cyber attacks, and the identity of the person, because it is being done by the machine. So you'll not be able to pinpoint who's the perpetrator of the attack. Then we have economic and financial risks. Abhi kya hai? There is a massive development of AI. So it is witnessing stock valuations. There is a massive rise in the stock valuations. There is a great investment which is flowing in this particular thing. But it can be a bubble also. There can be a massive loss of money of the people. So these are the important concerns. What are the key issues for India? Technological sovereignty. Means what? That if we are critically dependent on these technologies, and that too on these countries, on these specific companies, what about our strategic autonomy? Because we say that we want to be strategically autonomous, that our decisions should be just based on the national interest and not on any other parameter. Then limited frontier AI models. We have generative pre-trained transformer, the models, the GPT models. What you'll have to understand is that we are still not scaling those models to that level which is needed. We may have come up with our own AI models, but they are not to that level, to that of the OpenAI, ChatGPT, or the Gemini, or the other Anthropic. Okay. Computing infrastructure, we still lack that. Computing gap in terms of the GPUs. We are critically dependent on the imports of these chips, which cost massively. Every single chip is to the tune of almost 25-30 lakhs, a single chip. So again, a very important concern. Data governance, it is still evolving. You recently must have seen that the username policy of the WhatsApp has been struck down by the information technology rules. So we are witnessing an evolving IT domain, data governance. We still do not have robust IT domain architecture, right? AI regulation is without to balance. See, we need to also innovate, and we need to make sure that it does not go the other way, the negative way. So we'll have to balance this aspect, innovation versus stifling AI regulation in a way that which does not stifle the innovation, which does not suppresses the innovation. Okay. Talent drain, we already know. We have the engineers from the best colleges, NITs, IITs, then they're going to the US and earning a good amount of money. Energy requirements, we don't have the basic energy supplies. How we can have the energy supplies, massive energy requirements with respect to these AI models. For training, it needs a lot of electricity supply. What should be the way forward? We need to build indigenous AI capacity. For example, we have gone with the Servam AI, expand the compute infrastructure. We have gone with the India Semiconductor Mission 2.0. Previously, the India Semiconductor Mission only focused on the assembly, testing, and packaging. Right now, we are focusing on the indigenous production of these semiconductors, then strengthen the global AI governance, for example, in the form of Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence. This is basically OECD-backed framework, GPAI, or we can have more of collaboration among the G20 countries. Then protect against the deepfakes. Every AI content must have a mandatory watermarking or a labeling that this is AI generated. Or let's talk about invest in human capital. Right now, we have these courses must be included, not just in the IITs, not just in the engineering part, but rather starting from maybe from class 8, 9, 10th, 11th. So that people are aware of what this particular thing is, not just the basic languages, Java or Python. In fact, the whole architecture of these language models, of these deep learning, artificial neural networks, ANNs, this must be incorporated in the curriculums. Promote responsible AI. There has to be the ethical aspect. We need to be ethical as far as the development of AI is concerned. We cannot compromise on those aspects. So again, what you'll have to understand is this can lead to massive, deep inequalities, not just among the countries inter se, but also within countries also. Okay? So therefore, we need to have an equitable development, and we need to focus on every country. Every country must invest significantly as far as the overall AI is concerned, because this is the future. Okay? Let's have the mains practice question, a 10-marker question. Discuss the major governance challenges posed by the rapid advancement of artificial intelligence, particularly for the developing countries like India. Okay? So very simple question, a 10-marker, 2 pages. Try to write, because again, as I've said, writing is the most important part. there is no alternative, there is no substitute to it. Let's go to the mains validation part. Now, coming to the mains validation part, we have two case studies. One from the Mandsaur district of Madhya Pradesh, where there is a kind of 100% human papillomavirus vaccination which has been achieved primarily because of the community participation, the awareness, the behavioral nudge, the data-driven approach. So this can be well used in the answer. And the second case study is with respect to the Maharashtra bill, with respect to the women farmers. We'll read that. This is the Mandsaur district in Madhya Pradesh. Mandsaur district achieved 100% HPV vaccination coverage in under 40 days. So again, a great achievement by adopting a data-driven, decentralized and behaviorally informed approach. The administration mapped certain vulnerable groups, for example, the nomadic tribes, we have certain school dropouts, the slums areas. So therefore, they were mapped and they were properly targeted. Using Rashtriya Bal Suraksha Karyakram, Samagra IDs, Ladli Lakshmi Yojana databases supplemented by door-to-door surveys, behavioral nudges, repeated counseling, local influencers, peer champions and integration with the routine health services effectively countered the vaccine hesitancy. People are really hesitant to go for the vaccination still in some parts of the country. So this is basically has to be countered. And misinformation with respect to the vaccines. The initiative demonstrates how technology, community participation, behavioral insights, and targeted governance can ensure an inclusive last-mile delivery of the public health programs. This is one of the editorials which has been published. Now, in such editorials, you need not to read the entire article. You can just refer this particular summary and use as a case study. The second is with respect to Maharashtra Assembly passes the Women's Farmers Bill. In a landmark move, the Maharashtra Assembly, now this talks about strengthening the women farmers, that how we can have statutory frameworks, how we can have legal frameworks with respect to the protection of the women, specifically the women farmers. You can use as a case study. In a landmark move, the Maharashtra Assembly on Thursday unanimously passed the Women Farmers Empowerment Bill aimed at recognizing the women farmers so that they get access to the welfare schemes which have traditionally benefited the men. The bill gives recognition to the women who are engaged in agricultural and allied activities like fisheries, livestock rearing, poultry farming and collection of forest produce. So that is how you can use these in your answers. Let's go to the prelims pointer section. Coming to the prelims pointer section, we have Vikram 1, India's first ever privately developed orbital rocket, gears up for the launch. India's first privately developed orbital class rocket is all set for its maiden launch, and this has been developed by the Skyroot Aerospace. Now, what you'll have to understand is that we are witnessing a robust participation of the private entities in the overall space exploration, development, and everything. And therefore, this is again a very good thing because, right, see, initially ISRO was basically, it was to do everything for the space aspect. But now we have the private participation, and therefore ISRO can now adequately focus on the core competence, on the core R&D activities, and these other ancillary activities can be given to these private companies. Vikram 1's first test flight, named as Mission Agaman. The company said that the Mission Agaman means the arrival, marks its second mission following the successful suborbital flight of Vikram S. This was suborbital flight, and this is going to be the orbital rocket, the first private rocket to reach space from Indian soil on November 18, 2022. The mission will gather critical data across propulsion, stage separation with respect to the rocket, guidance, navigation, control, and overall vehicle performance. This is also a good opportunity to discuss about three things: NSIL, New Space India Limited, InSpace, and Antrix. Let's see what these are three distinct entities under the Department of Space. NSIL is primarily commercial arm of the ISRO, focusing on demand-driven missions and technology transfer. InSpace is a regulatory and promotional body for the private space companies. Antrix is the older commercial arm handling the legacy contracts. The Indian space sector has undergone the massive reforms, restructuring how ISRO operates alongside private players. Here is a specific breakdown. The very first is New Space India Limited. Incorporated in 2019, NSIL takes a demand-driven approach rather than ISRO's traditional supply-driven one. It is responsible for manufacturing launch vehicles, for example, the polar satellite launch vehicles, through industry partnerships, taking into partnerships with the private entities, marketing the spin-off technologies, whatever the resultant technologies are with respect to the space development, and building satellites based on direct consumer requirements. InSpace, Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center, established in 2020, this autonomous agency it's autonomous, acts as the crucial single window authorization and regulatory body for the private sector. It allows private players to use the ISRO facilities, build their own launch vehicles, for example, as Skyroot Aerospace has done, and satellites, and participate across the entire value chain. Antrix Corporation, founded in 92, Antrix was ISRO's first commercial and marketing arm. It was originally set up to market satellite imagery, lease transponders, and launch foreign payloads. With creation of NSIL, Antrix now primarily exists to fulfill and manage existing commercial agreements which have been there before and resolve the legacy contracts, while NSIL handles all new projects. So all the new things are being taken care of by NSIL. The older contracts are being handled by the Antrix Corporation. Together, these entities shift India's space ecosystem from a solely government-led endeavor to that of the robust public-private partnership. So these are the three agencies. Make sure you understand them. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is about Indian Navy foils privacy attempt in Gulf of Aden. 3 vessels still in captivity. International Maritime Organization has warned. As I told you initially, there is a resurgence of piracy in the Indian Ocean construct, specifically in the Arabian Sea region, and therefore this becomes quite important. INS Trikant intercepts and secures Tuticorin bound bulk carrier Golden Arsenal. International Maritime Organization says 3 other ships are held by pirates, with a critical situation aboard one of them, which has an Indian crew member, 5 Indians among the crews of 2 of the 3 ships. Okay, let's talk about the Gulf of Aden. So this is the Gulf of Aden. We have the Red Sea over here. We have Gulf of Aden, and this is what I say is the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb. The Strait of Bab el-Mandeb, it is basically, if you just look at this particular infographic, you'll see there are 2 countries. We have Eritrea over there, and we have Djibouti over here, and over here we have Yemen. So it is between these 3 countries, Yemen on one side and Djibouti and Eritrea on the other. So remember that. Now let's talk about IMO, a specialized agency of the United Nations. IMO is the agency of the United Nations responsible for global shipping safety, security, and the prevention of marine and atmospheric pollution. Created via the UN Convention in Geneva in 1948, came into force in 1958. Headquarters are in London. Do remember, because sometimes UPSC has also asked the headquarters are in London, UK. IMO does not enforce its own policies. Implementation is entirely by the legal responsibility of individual member states. Assembly, the highest governing body containing all the member states, meets once every 2 years. The executive organ is the council of 40 elected members serving the 2-year terms. Core committees, 5 specialized policy bodies, handle the active drafting of maritime laws. Maritime Safety Committee, Marine Environment Protection Committee, Legal Committee, Technical Cooperation Committee, and Facilitation Committee. Major international conventions, these are the international conventions. The International Maritime Regulatory Framework relies on 4 foundational pillars. SOLAS, focus on ship construction and safety of the life at sea. MARPOL, very important, marine pollution, aims to prevent pollution from sea. STCW focuses on the seafarer training and certification, ensures MLC, ensures maritime labor standards. Other key conventions, Hong Kong Convention, ship recycling. Tell me one of the very important places in India where ship recycling takes place. Okay? Reconstruction facility. Ballast Water Management Convention, invasive species. India and the IMO. India, a member since 1959, holds a consistent position on the IMO Council. India supports the sustainable shipping initiatives and has aligned domestic laws. Recycling of Ships Act 2019 with the Hong Kong Convention. Environment targets, India is engaged in international discussions to achieve the net zero greenhouse gas emissions from the shipping by 2050. So this is what you have to understand, and remember this because there can be a possible question. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, here's a mention of the very important strategic pipeline, gas pipelines, which is the Nord Stream. German prosecutors said on Thursday that the Ukrainian state ordered a 2022 bomb attack on the Nord Stream gas pipelines, complicating the relations between Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, and its key military backer Berlin, Germany. The sabotage, never claimed by any actor, destroyed 3 of the 4 Baltic seafloor pipelines of the major energy link, and this basically links what? From Russia to Germany, and released huge amounts of methane into the atmosphere. There can be a possible question. Let's read about this. The Nord Stream pipeline is a natural gas pipeline that runs under the Baltic Sea. This is the sea under which the the pipeline runs connecting Russia and Germany. The pipeline was built with the aim of transporting natural gas from Russia to Europe, bypassing the traditional transit countries such as Ukraine, via the safe route under the sea, not through the land route. The first line of the Nord Stream pipeline was completed in 2011 and the second in 2012, and it has since become a major source of natural gas for Europe, particularly Germany. Nord Stream 1 is a 1,224 kilometer underwater gas pipeline running from Vyborg in northwest Russia to Lublin in northeastern Germany via the Baltic Sea. Nord Stream 2, which runs from Ust-Luga in Leningrad, Russia to Lublin, has the capacity to handle 55 billion cubic meters of gas per year once it becomes fully operational. Recent issue, we're talking about this in 2022, where the attack happened. A series of underwater explosions in the Baltic Sea ruptured the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines in September 22. Seismologists detected the cause for the leak to be explosions undersea in the same area. Significance: the Nord Stream pipelines have significant economic and political implications for both Europe and Russia. For Europe, the Nord Stream pipeline provides a reliable and cost-effective source of natural gas. Europe is energy deficient and it needs huge energy supplies, and it was initially quite dependent on Russia. And that is what India says, that Europe has a kind of a very hypocritical approach, that it asks India to stop the supplies from Russia as far as energy needs are concerned, but it has still a huge dependence on the Russian gas, which is, though it has cut, but still there is dependence, which is still a crucial energy source for many countries in the region. Many European businesses have large investments in Nord Stream 2, and there is a pressure on the government from these businesses, the business lobby. And this is, if you can see, we have Vyborg and we have Ust-Luga. These are the two places in Russia, and then we have Nord Stream 1 and 2. And this over here, it links to the Germany. Okay. Finally, a reduction in gas from Russia would increase already high gas prices that would not be popular domestically. For Russia, Russia is dependent on the exchange which it earns as far as the supply of oil and gas is concerned. Russia, which has the largest natural gas reserve in the world, around 40% of its budget comes from the sales of gas and oil. Furthermore, the Nord Stream pipelines provide Russia with a way to increase its influence over Europe's energy market as it becomes a major supplier of natural gas to the region. So do remember, there can be a possible question. It runs via or under the Baltic Sea. Remember that. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the last topic of today's discussion, here's a mention of the Public Accounts Committee. A heated argument erupted in Parliament. Public Accounts Committee. On Thursday, after the Education Secretary Vineet Joshi sought to prevent questions being posed to the Central Board of Secondary Education, saying that the board fell outside the panel's agenda for the day. The CBSE has come under fire in the recent months for the serious discrepancies, the issues, for example, the on-screen marking system for its Class 12th examination. The PSE chaired by senior Congress leader K.C. Venugopal. So therefore, it makes clear that the chairperson is from the opposition. But this is not a rule. It's a convention. It's the oldest parliamentary committee, Public Accounts Committee, which was established in 1921, constituted every year. The chairperson is appointed by the speaker from amongst its members of the Lok Sabha. The speaker, for the first time, appointed a member of the opposition as a chairperson in 1967 and 68, and then a convention developed that the chairperson of the PSE should be from the opposition. Audits the revenue and the expenditure of the Government of India to ensure the public funds are spent efficiently, and it examines, it reads, it comprehensively goes through the reports of the Comptroller and Auditor General. It examines the CAG audit reports on the government expenditure, ensures money sanctioned by the Parliament is spent properly, investigates the financial irregularities, losses and inefficiencies in the government. Membership consists of 22 members, 15 from Lok Sabha, 7 from the Raj Sabha. Chairperson, a Lok Sabha MP, traditionally from the opposition. This is not a rule, rather a convention. Term is 1 year. Ministers cannot be a part of PSE because ultimately the very objective of PSE is to ensure the executive's accountability, and therefore ministers cannot be a part of it. Here we come at the end of the discussion. I hope you really like the discussion. Again, as I said, the very objective is to give you as much as validation possible. Please write the answers. That would be of immense help. All the very best to all of you.